All right, that is my cue to start then. Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to come listen to me talk about the Adult Education Racial Equity Grant. My name is Addie Wolbaum, and I will be the presenter today. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Assistant for this grant. The grantee, Simu Oleski, she was not able to be here today, but she's the program manager of Southwest Adult Basic Education, and she hired me on as the grant assistant, and I'm also the DEI assistant for the City of Marshall and their DEI commission. So today we're going to be talking about and updating you guys on our activities of the Racial Equity and Adult Education Grant. Just this past June, we finished up our first year, so there's lots of updates and lots of future activities to discuss. So this is just a quick little overview of what we'll be looking at today. An overview of the grant, we'll be looking at year 1 and year 2 activities. I'll be explaining the surveys that we disperse, and I'll be talking about what we're going to be doing in the future. And I am a little sick, so bear with me if I need to take a little water break. So to start off, about a year and a half ago, C had applied to be the grantee of this Racial Equity and Adult Education Grant. And she ended up getting it, and it has been just a huge project. And from the start, we were excited to see where we could go with it. And we were given 5 goals to follow and to achieve to kind of start us off. So goal 1 was to perform some sort of a racial equity analysis. So this could be, in our situation, we decided to disperse 3 different surveys and send them out to people. And we asked about questions revolving around equity to kind of get an idea of what each site was like. And although this grant is called the Racial Equity in Adult Education, it also highlights other marginalized identities, such as like the LGBTQ plus community, people with varying immigration statuses, socioeconomic statuses. So although the title and kind of the main focus is race, there's so many other things that we are looking at this survey at the same time. So goal 2 was then to make recommendations and actions based on all of our findings. And we'll make these recommendations at state and local levels based on what we find from the surveys. Goal 3 is to form advisory groups. And so last year we started our first advisory group, and we have fresh ones this year as well. There is a student one and a educator and ABE partner group. So these groups are used to kind of guide our conversations, they're used to support us, they're used to just help us in any way that we need. Goal 4 is to coordinate with professional development. C regularly attends the PD communications meetings, the quarterly meetings, and we're going to be working with them in the future more to find out what kind of PD opportunities that we would like to see more of in ABE, and what more can we do for our staff. And then goal 5 is then to share all this information with everybody in various ways. We'll be presenting at this coming Spring Institute, we'll be presenting at Summer Institute, and at various other meetings and conferences over the next 2 years. So we're finding information, we're getting guidance from people, and then we're sharing that information with everybody else. So like I said, year 1 just wrapped up this past June, and it was a very busy year. It's tough when you're given a grant with just those 5 goals. It's kind of tough to decide, where do we want to go now? What's next? How do we even get started? But we did get started by selecting our consultant. C did a lot of talking. She made a lot of connections and found an amazing consultant. Her name is Rose, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her in a little bit. And then in the past year, like I said before, we formed our 2 advisory groups. We developed and administered 3 different surveys, one for administrators and for people in management positions, one for educators and any other staff members at sites, and then one specifically for students, past and current ABE students. And then in the past year, we also had a little talk about organizing future focus groups. So this is Rose. She is our data consultant, our data analyst consultant. She is just amazing. She has spent her whole life in working in education. She does have a research and engineering background, which has been extremely helpful on top of all of her educational knowledge. She is able to think about things in ways that C&I don't really see things. She is very technical. She's very, very intelligent. She was great in when we were creating the surveys. She really knows how to ask questions in a way that we can get the answers that we're looking for. She's been very helpful with all of that nitty-gritty stuff, all of the research stuff that we're not as educated in. She's amazing. And she also does a lot of like cultural competency training with Atlas. She is just amazing, and she is so passionate about her work in education in all aspects. And right now she was awarded the 2022 Bush Fellowship. So she is just really so amazing and has been so helpful over the past year. And thankfully she agreed to come on year 2 with us as well. So we're lucky to have Rose. So after we selected our consultant, we had to figure out how we're going to start these surveys. So we decided to do them on Google Forms, and we started in last fall 2021. We decided to use Google Forms because it was all online. This made it easy for us because we had issues when we were doing collecting applications for our advisory groups. We started receiving applications through email. We got applications via phone call. We had them on Google, and it kind of became a little difficult with all this information coming at us and in so many different forms. We didn't want to lose track of anything, and especially with these surveys, we did not want to miss anybody's surveys, so we kept them mainly on Google Forms. And we do realize that this could have created a barrier, but where we were in the project, this is just the best way that we thought about doing it. So while we were creating these surveys, we first needed to do a lot of brainstorming because an equity analysis has never been done in adult basic education. Something statewide has never been conducted before. So we didn't really have any base of how to do this, what to do, what to ask. Equity can involve basically every aspect of education. So there were so many things that we wanted to ask, and still so many things that we have questions about, but we had to start somewhere. So we used our advisory groups to help brainstorm questions and like section and like survey sections, main topics. So this just started off as lots of little conversations with our advisory groups. With our student one, we asked them, what are some problems you see in ABE? What do you like? What do you dislike? What's been easy? What hasn't been easy? And those little conversations started to snowball and snowball. Students were able to build off each other, and we were able to form our main ideas for these surveys. So when I show you the surveys later, keep in mind that basically everything was formed by our 2 advisory groups. We got a lot of input from them, and we actually got too much input. There were so many things that they wanted us to ask about and include, but we just couldn't because we didn't want to have too long of a survey. So while we got all the main ideas figured out, we then worked super closely with Rose to create the questions and the prompts in a way that will produce those good, meaningful answers. Most of the questions we use the Likert scale, so strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree, and even figuring out the options for all the questions are mostly multiple choice. And C&I, we didn't realize how much thought really needs to go into even just thinking about what options are available for participants to select. So Rose's input was Very, very helpful and meaningful. And then throughout the surveys, we have all the questions, but there's also multiple spaces for participants to expand on their responses. So we'll have like question 1 and then question 1A. Is there anything else you would like to say regarding question 1? We wanted to make sure that although we have our specific questions, we still kind of wanted it to be like a feel free to share whatever's on your mind about this. And then we did, with the student survey specifically, we understand that a lot of ABE students do not either do not speak English or do not have a strong reading ability or so on and so on. So we did try to keep the student survey very sweet, simple, and concise. We had the survey reviewed by our advisory group, and this advisory group is like teachers, they're program managers, their support staff. They were able to help nitpick the words that we use in each question. Like if there was one word that they thought was a little too difficult, we'd pick out a different word and make that sentence easier. So we did a lot of contemplation about the language and the wording of each and every little question. And then with the surveys, we relied on the program managers to pass on those emails to their educators and then on to their students. So I just got a chat asking if the survey was sent out in different languages, and that is something that I was planning to discuss later on in the presentation. And I'll quickly say now, sadly, we were not able to, and we know this is a huge problem with equity, because equity is all about giving support to students, to people that need it more. And due to a lack of resources, a lack of funding, we weren't able to translate. And that is a huge barrier and a huge problem that we are going to try to think about how we can overcome it in the future. But that weighed heavily on us, and it's something that we're going to need to work on later. So thank you for asking that. So now that you understand kind of like the framework of the surveys, I want to go through each survey and tell you what was on it. So with our administrator survey, we got 53 responses, which we thought was pretty good. C says that there's 39 consortiums in Minnesota, so then 53 is a pretty decent number. We had sections A through G, and they're all asking about different things. So section A, we wanted to ask about the organizational structures at their sites. We wanted to see how those answers varied between different people taking the surveys. We then asked about student demographic data, asking about how like the student information database collects information, what kind of options they have for students to select. For example, like we asked if we thought the answers of male and female were good enough for SID, or if there should be more options. We also ask about staff demographic data. We ask what percentage of their staff is Black, Indigenous, or people of color. We ask about if they think their staff are representative of the students that they serve. We ask about talent management, ask about what their hiring practices are, just to kind of get a good layout and a good idea of what it looks like throughout the state. And then in section E, that was all about supporting and advancing equity. We ask about what kind of PD opportunities they have. We ask if administrators feel confident to lead from an equity standpoint. Asking questions about if they think they are able to support their staff well enough, or if they even know enough about equity to lead in this way, or if they feel supported. And then in each of the sections, we have a section F and a section G, which are just a little section about any feedback, any comments, and people did utilize those. We got lots and lots of comments asking questions or sharing other thoughts and feelings. And then we also thought it was important to ask about their identities. And none of this information is specific enough to identify a specific person, but we did want to ask about race, gender, age, sexuality, language ability, because we want to have a picture of what our administration looks like and what our students look like to see if they're representative, and that because how representative admin is of their students can have a really large impact on their students. So then in the Educator survey, it's somewhat similar. We did want to keep them sort of similar, so we have a way of comparing responses. In section A, we just ask them about what their position is like, what their experience is in ABE, just to, once again, paint a big picture. And then in section B, we ask about professional development, and we ask how supported they feel by their admin. We ask about their confidence to pursue from an equity standpoint. We ask if they may be receiving PD, but is it the kind of PD they want to see, and is it actually beneficial in the field? And then in section C, this was a very, very important topic we found from our advisory groups. They really wanted us to ask heavily on resources and accessibility. So we ask about like, what kind of resources do you have available at your site? Because from conversations with our advisory groups, this one example really stuck out to me. One student was saying how at their site, they have an in-house daycare. They have a bus that picks up ABE students. They have all of this, they have translators for multiple languages always on site. And then this advisory member was sharing her story, and other students were like, oh, wow, we don't have any of that. That must be super nice. So we wanted to ask some of the teachers what kind of resources and support and accommodations that they provide for their students. So once again, we can kind of see if it varies a ton throughout the state. And because if we see all that variation, we know that probably affects students' success rates. And then we also ask, like, if they, we ask if they are confident to support students who may need accommodations, and some of those responses weren't very positive. Some don't feel that way. I just got another chat asking if the Educator survey was provided to support staff. And yes, it should have been. And if you did not receive it, the issue with trying to get this survey out was relying on consortium managers to, first of all, read the email, say that they care and want to pass this on to their sites. So if you did not receive it, there was probably an issue with the communication. But that was just the best way that we thought about doing it, was relying on consortium managers, which once again created a barrier. So then in section D, teaching and learning, we talk about, the appropriateness of curriculum and materials used. We talk about if their PD stuff that they're provided, if it's actually applicable in the classroom. We talk about if they know if they're leading from an equity standpoint and how they can be more equity centered in the classroom. And then we talk about like assessment strategies used, because that was another important thing discussed in our advisory groups. We had a section about workplace conditions, and this was kind of talking about like, is equity talked about amongst you and your coworkers at all? Do you feel comfortable and safe to be in your workplace as your true self? Are you able to, if you have experienced any discrimination, what has come of that? We just wanted to ask some of those more deep personal questions about what it's actually like in the workplace regarding equity. And once again, there's a section about demographics and comments and feedbacks. In the feedback section, there were so many amazing answers of people really, really wanting to do more of this kind of work, but just not knowing where to start because it is such a big, big project. So now section G, more about you. We also ask about professional licenses and level of education to see how that varies amongst our staff. And then in the student survey, we had 458 responses. I did not state this for the Educator one, but I believe it was 123 surveys completed by educators, which was more than we expected, so that was great. So with the student survey, we had 458 responses, and this was also including 17 from students within county jails. So section A was all about starting my ABE journey. And once again, this student survey, every section and basically every question was from conversations with our student advisory group. These were the things that they really cared about and wanted to see some answers to and hear more about. So section A was starting my ABE journey. We asked how easy it was to get into a program, if they were placed accurately in their levels, if it was easy to find information. Then in section B, it's all about supporting my ABE journey. Do they have enough resources to reach their full academic and social potential? Are they provided with accommodations to support learning needs or mental health needs? Are sites being responses to religious or cultural practices? These were all important things that came up. So then in section C, we had lots of conversations about relevancy of the subjects and skills being taught. A lot of students, they said they want more real life skills to be talked about. So those were some questions we asked to hear from other students. We also asked if the materials being used are representative of the students, like whether it is examples that are being used in the classroom. Is it always about a white guy, you know, or are the examples based on stereotypes, stuff like that. And then in section D, we talk about how they're learning, whether they have control over their learning experience, if they feel like they're being supported by their teacher in their learning experience, and so forth. And then section E is just asking about their relationship with their teacher, and if they feel like their teacher supports and also represents them. And section F, once again, asks a lot about their identities. We also ask about their history with ABE, if they've ever had to leave a program, and we also ask why. This was really telling to us. We also asked if they need to commute to campus and how far, because all of these could potentially be barriers for students. And then section G, another, feedback and comments, just a share all, tell all section. So quickly, I'm going to look at some of the themes, share some of the themes. All of this information will be shared in the next year and a half. We're still working on creating and figuring out how we want to share it, but these were some of the main themes that we noticed from the admin survey. People want SID to be updated to actually reflect a more diverse group of races and genders and languages. We noticed that some programs do collect additional information, if students need specific accommodations or if they need extra support. Some sites do collect that stuff to better serve their students, but then some sites don't have any process to collect information like this. We also found that there is a very small percent of BIPOC staff in most sites. And there's a huge challenge to filling positions, and I'm sure everyone knows about this in every field of work right now, but it's hard to fill positions, and also a lot of sites are trying to pursue diversity and get staff that represents their students, but a lot of sites are just taking what they can get mostly, and that's just the state of the world today. Another thing we noticed that there's a huge difference in some sites. Some sites are doing a lot of work with equity, and some seem to not have much knowledge on it and aren't doing it. So I'm seeing a question in the chat right now. What greater measures have been taken to have more teachers of color in ABE? That is a question right now that I can't answer that question. Right now, it's from the conversations I've had, people are wanting to take measures to try to diversify their staff, but it's just difficult hiring anybody right now. So that is something that we're going to need to work on in the future, getting ideas on how to diversify their staff, whether it's like a student to staff program kind of transition thing. That's been something we've talked about. But it's a huge task, and I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for that. And also another main theme with the admin is that people know there's a lot of work to be done, but they just don't know how to start. And I think that's a common occurrence with all of us. And then with the admin survey, 83% of those 53 people that took it identified as white or Caucasian. So some main themes we found in the educator survey, they want more professional development focused on equity, focused on how to actually pursue equity in the classroom. They're not seen as much as that as they would like. Funds, more funding, that's always going to be something that people want more of. We always want more funding for resources and for training. Educators feel that they aren't as confident as they like to be to support students that may need those special accommodations or accessibility support. And then also educators want and need more accessible and relevant training. Those were the main things we found. So with the student survey, some main things, the students would like to see more technology services in classes, which that seems very fair to me. The world right now is basically all online. They want to be up to date with how to succeed in this kind of world. And they're also interested in seeing more useful life skills. Oops. But overall, we were kind of shocked at just how, we weren't necessarily shocked, but overall, everybody seems really pleased with their ABE experiences as students. And I think that's just because they're so grateful to be able to be able to receive an education. Because education is very important to these students. And we think they may not have said many negative things about their sites just because they are so grateful with what their sites have done for them. So in the future, when we have our focus groups, hopefully we'll be able to kind of get more of those honest and deeper answers. But it's not necessarily a bad thing that students feel pleased in their experiences. So that's kind of why it was important for us to not only ask these survey questions to students, but then also get the perspectives of the educators and the admin to see how it varies within ABE. So as I said before, the huge challenge right away was we want to be able to translate it. But first of all, which languages do we choose to translate it to? We had some conversations with someone who works with SID, and she told us all the big languages spoken in Minnesota. And there's like 7 main ones that are very large. But then of course, there's tons of other languages spoken by ABE students. So we had so many conversations of, well, if we translate it, do we pick a couple to translate to? Because then that's like cherry picking, and that's not really fair. But we don't have the means to translate it to every single language. So that was really difficult. And with the approval from our 2 advisory groups, we just had to move on with having in English and doing what we could to make it as simple as we could. And then also, we told consortium managers to say that if their students need help and assist in taking the surveys, that that teachers can help them understand the context, but just of course not persuade the answers. So that's kind of how we went about it, and wasn't the best option, but that's just what we had to do. And then also another challenge was reaching the students. Like I said before, when someone asked if support staff could receive them, we had to rely on the consortium managers to then pass on to teachers, to then pass on to the students. So there was a lot of, moving the information around to get it to the right people. It would have been great if we could have sent an email to every single ABE student, but we couldn't do that. So year 2 just started this past June. In year 2, we're going to still have our monthly advisory meetings. We're working on dispersing surveys to the Department of Corrections and to students in the Department of Corrections. And then we're also working on analyzing all of that data that I just shared with you, and then we'll be compiling and sharing the results. And we also want to host 2 focus groups in the future. So these are the names of our members and their sites that they represent for our current advisory group. We have 2 people from the Department of Corrections. We have people from, north of the state, south of the state. We tried to make it as diverse as we could with the people so that they represent all parts of the state. represent different identities, and we're very happy with this group. They've been so helpful. And then with our student advisory group, I didn't include their names, but these are the sites that they represent. And since this year, we're going to be focusing a lot on doing this research in the Department of Corrections, we do have 4 members representing the DOC. And this advisory group, they're going to be helping with analyzing the data in the next couple months. And they're going to help us guide the focus group process. They're going to help us think about what kind of questions they would like to see further investigated. So as I said, right now we are really focusing on the Department of Corrections. So when we sent out the student surveys back in this past spring, we sent them out, and then we realized we weren't getting anything back from people from the Department of Corrections. And we did some digging, and then one of our advisory members actually told us that in order for any research or any survey like this to get into the Department of Corrections, they have to go through a very intense approval process. So of course, this was just like a huge bump in the road. We weren't expecting it. We were so excited to have this student survey done and to get it out to people. But then this big bump came up, and we, C and I, we talked and we were like, we can't stop here. We can't not include students that are incarcerated in the Department of Corrections. That wouldn't be very fair. That wouldn't be capturing the voice of Minnesota adult basic ed students. So we found out what the approval process was like. We had to complete a whole research packet, a huge human subjects application process. C had to go through a background check. We had to explain all of our research process from like in a scientific method kind of way. I even had to create a whole literature review talking about why equity in education is important. So it was very intense. We had no clue if we were going to be approved or not, but we submitted that in September, and we were approved on September 15th to carry on. And the Research and Evaluation Committee just had a few suggestions for us to make some changes. So we were very happy that we could continue on with the work in the DOC. And so in October through November, we've been working on creating the survey packet, which will include the surveys, consent forms, instructions for the people to facilitate the surveys. And we're working on communicating with the DOC sites right now to try to recruit sites to participate in this. And this past week, we had a couple of informational meetings to talk with the education directors and go over the process of it. And it's been a tough process because the DOC, they are limited in time and capacity, and to be able to take a couple hours or more out of their time to do something like this, we know it's going to be very difficult, but we are having so many conversations with these ed directors. We're trying to accommodate them. We're expanding the deadline to when we wanted to have this done. We're really doing what we can to make it work because we put so much work into this, and we have our students that are in the DOC on our advisory board. Last year, they worked so hard to help us create these questions. They were so passionate. They made such a lasting impact on CNI that we just couldn't stop. And we want to make this worth it. We want to do what we can to get all the voices. So our deadline to have these surveys facilitated was going to be January 31st, but we're gonna keep pushing that back, knowing that the holidays are coming up, and we're just doing what we can. C even said she'll go up to one of the sites and facilitate the survey if she needs to, if that helps with the time situation. So right now we've been talking to 5 sites. One site has for sure confirmed that they're going to participate. So that's great, but we're still working on getting more on board. So once we get all of the surveys done, once we get everything done with the DOC, we're going to combine all of those surveys with our former 400 and some student surveys. And we're going to look at all of that data, and we're going to come up with what are the main things that we're seeing? What are the main themes? What are the things that we want to dig deeper into? So in the spring, maybe in the summer, maybe next fall, depending on how long we need to push this DOC stuff in, push this DOC stuff back, we're going to have 2 focus groups. One is going to be for metro area students, and then one will be for rural and incarcerated students, and that'll be on Zoom. We want to create that deeper dialogue to find out more specific questions, and we know that this will be very helpful with, so with the student surveys. Some of these students that were taking it may have not had that strong of an English language ability, of course. So to actually have more conversations that might give us more honest and fruitful answers. And this year we do have some more, we have some extra funding aside. So when we do have these focus groups, we will be able to have translators at hand to help us with it and really have a meaningful conversation. And we had one of our advisory members said that we can do it at the Roseville Community Center for the Metro one, because we'll be doing that one in person. So that was great. So for any of you, if you know a student who would be passionate about equity and would love to kind of share their information, share their insight, and would like to be a part of this, please reach out to me, and I would love to talk to that student. And keep an eye out for emails that will be coming up in the spring. So that was a lot of information, I know, and it doesn't seem like a lot to me. I talk about it all the time. So any questions or any concerns, any comments, I'd love to hear it. And that's C's email. She is the grantee and I'm the assistant. So feel free to bug me with any emails, any questions after this. I'd be happy to talk. Well, Marisa, that's it from me if there are any questions.
Right, and do feel free to unmute if that's easier to ask your question.
Okay, so I just saw a chat from Rachel, to get around the language barrier with student surveys, can you use Google Translate? Google Translate is not always accurate. Sometimes, like I've taken a lot of Spanish classes in my life, and professors always tell us not to use Google Translate because it doesn't translate accurately, and with languages that I'm not very familiar with, it would not be a reliable tool to translate. But then once again, there were so many languages that we could have translated to that we needed to bring someone else on board who knows more about this process. And that's something that we're going to have to consider when we do stuff in the future. And if you don't want to ask a question now, please feel free to email me. Yes, as Jody said, another thing is that with some languages, students don't always read or write in their native language. They just speak it.
All right. Well, if anyone has additional questions, we can stick around for just a couple more minutes. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and thank Addie so much for this great presentation. And I'm just chatting out the agenda again, and the next session starts at 11. So hopefully we will see you there. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here.
Thank you, everyone.